Chapter 47. After finishing the strength and agility training in the indoor gymnasium, he went outside to the outdoor gymnasium. She isn't here. Since he kept hearing the thrusting sounds of a sword, he thought Raon was there. However, he couldn't see her. Strangely, it looked like she'd left first. It's annoying when she is around, but I miss her a bit now that she is gone. Raon would always wait for him to finish training, then leave after saying goodbye with a nod. It didn't feel like anything special, but now that he didn't get that greeting, he missed it a little. How come I'm missing that? Was I brainwashed? Raon smirked and left the training ground. Since Bayan and Martha were still in there, he didn't need to clear up like he usually did. How pathetic. What? It shouldn't be the time to think about such a thing. What do you mean? Wrath didn't continue. Without saying anything, he just stared towards the west. What's up? Raon turned his head towards the direction that Wrath was looking. Even though he couldn't sense anything, he had a strange feeling. Just in case. Rotating the ring of fire, he used the aura from the 10,000 flame cultivation. He also activated the perception of the snowflower to spread his perception wide. Tick. Something was caught up in his perception nearby. However, he still couldn't sense anything. Which meant someone has used an energy barrier. An unknown person had used their aura to block sound and their presence. I should go check. He normally wouldn't have cared what they were doing, but he figured he should check it out because of Wrath's reaction. Using the shadow footwork to completely hide his presence in case he needed to run away, he ran towards where the area energy barrier was set up. Inside the dark alley, without any of the house's swordsman guards, two people were standing. One of them was Raon, and the other was a tall man. Why is she there? And that expression is. He'd thought Raon had returned home, but she was grabbing her hands right in front of him. Her expression was normal, but her eyes seemed frightened. He looked at the man. A handsome man with silver hair and purple eyes like Raon was standing there with a greatsword on his back. Sirius Sullian. He'd heard that name in his previous life. He was the genius of House Sullian, who'd put his name on the 12 stars of the continent, who are the 12 monsters that are expected to become the 10 heavens of the continent in the future. Why is she afraid? Despite seeing her older brother, Raon didn't smile or look happy. Instead, she was as scared as a rabbit that had met a savage beast. Syria was saying something to Raon, but he couldn't really hear it. He suddenly took out a cute squirrel from his chest and offered it to Raon. Then, the moment Raon extended her hand, he crushed the squirrel. Arf! Although he couldn't hear the sound because of the energy barrier, he could at least tell that Raon was screaming. With a terrifyingly dry expression, Syria approached Raon and started to whisper in her ear. I have to stop him. He didn't understand what was going on, but it felt like he couldn't let him continue. Raon advanced, fully utilizing the aura from the 10,000 flame cultivation. Bang! The ground collapsed and a thundering noise burst out. He could see Syria frowning, stepping away from Raon. Who are you? Without missing his opportunity, Raon stood in front of Raon. Tilting his head, he glared at Syria. Who are you to be bullying Raon? He had to pretend he didn't know him. If he knew that Syria was Raon's family, he couldn't interfere. After all, he was her family. However, if he pretended that he didn't know, it became possible for him to interfere. If you are asking for someone's name, shouldn't you give yours first? Syria smiled leisurely. That's not something you should say when you set up an energy barrier in an alley like this. Are you a thief? Syria frowned as Raon mocked him. However, it felt like he was acting as if he was pretending to be angry when he was neither flustered nor angry. I know the type of person that would act like this would be Darius Robert, who'd killed him in his previous life. He could smell the same stench from Syria. I guess you could misunderstand like that. But I'm neither a thief nor a stranger. I'm her older brother. Syria pointed at Raon, who was behind Raon. Blocking Syria's gaze, Raon took a glance at Raon. Her expression was still blank, but it was a different kind of blankness than usual. She looked like she was immensely shocked, with her shoulders trembling so much that he felt sorry for her. She looks like she's scared. Are you really her older brother? Ah, I played a prank on her, since we haven't seen each other for a long time. Now she's like that. Is crushing a squirrel in your hand a prank? Ah, this isn't real. It's just a toy. When Surya swung his hand, the bloodstains in his hand and floor turned into ash and were blown away. He'd completely melted the flesh and blood using his aura. There's no way I would have really killed a squirrel, right? A terrifying pressure emanated from his entire body. It was a stench of death, similar to the scent he'd gotten from Darius before dying to him. Insolence! How dare a mere human threaten the King of Essence's possessed body? Raon didn't respond and pulled up his pressure. Just as Wrath said, he was threatening him. He was warning him that he should withdraw, since he could kill him exactly the same way. However, he hadn't come without any preparation. Raon! You bastard, did you just damage the house's property? Bun, who was on the training ground, ran out. The swordsmen that were standing guard were also running towards them. He could also hear Martha cursing from afar about her training being disturbed. Raon! You were Raon Zighart. I see. Surya's eyes turned completely dark, like a bead covered in a black ink. Raon's hair prickled because his eyes looked like his emotions had been rubbed out. It really is a misunderstanding. Since I received a long-term mission right after I've returned, I just wanted to give my little sister some snacks. He took out a rectangular box and put it on the ground. The shape and design were slightly different, but it was a beet ice cream box. Runan. Surya's eyes changed once again. They were the eyes of an older brother looking at his beloved little sister. You have a great friend. Keep getting along with him in the future. MHM. I'm sorry if my pranks were excessive. Please take care, see you again next time. He waved his hand and disappeared, as if he became the wind. No way. Was he actually the Surya Sullian from the 12 stars of the continent? Bayan gasped, looking at where Surya used to be. His atmosphere is different. He isn't one of the 12 stars for nothing. Indeed, he is different. Raon nodded. Since he was called a genius and a hero, he'd never thought he was such a crazy bastard. Runan. He turned around to look at Runan. Her expression was the same as always, but her eyes were shaking. It looked like she was still scared. Let's go. I'll see you off. Since Surya said he had a mission, he wasn't going to be at home. Okay. Runan nodded slowly and stood up. Did something happen? Bayan approached them, holding the beet ice cream box in his hand. Nothing special. Raon accepted the box instead and shook his head. Is that so? Bayan didn't press any further. Tell me if you need any help. As a fellow trainee, I'll do whatever I can to help you. After saying that, he left the alley. He really has grown up a lot. Bayan had changed so much, to the point that it made him proud just watching him. But the King of Essence still doesn't like his eyes. Thank you. What? It was thanks to you that I could save Runan. I'm not sure if I really managed to save her, though. Ahem. That girl is the King of Essence's ice cream girl. I only told you about it because it felt like I couldn't eat any more ice cream if something troublesome happened. That's exactly what I'm thanking you for. Then ask her to give some of that ice cream. I could have seen you in a different light if you hadn't said that. Raon tapped Wrath away with his hand. That damn monarch really couldn't read the situation. Let's go. MHM. He brought Runan to where the people from House Sullian were waiting. Raon didn't say anything as he walked next to Runan. It was someone else's family, and he didn't know their exact circumstances. He was well aware that trying to awkwardly comfort her wasn't going to help in any way. When Runan's steps became slow, he did the same. He stopped when she did. He just silently walked next to her, keeping his pace with her. It didn't take long until House Sullian's carriage and maids came into sight. Raon watched until Runan got on the carriage, then handed her over the ice cream box that he was holding. Thank you. Runan left after speaking the words glumly, where she had once said them with a cheerful voice. When Runan arrived at the mansion, Roken Sullian came out to meet her.
Runan. Good job on your training. MHM.
Runan nodded and left the carriage.
Did you meet your older brother? He went to you, saying he wanted to give you a present personally. MHM.
After taking a deep breath, Runan showed him the ice cream box. Her eyes were blank, as usual.
It's your favorite ice cream.
He seems to always think about you, despite being busy with missions and training. Roken murmured that he didn't get any presents for him and burst into laughter.
Runan clenched her jaw.
She considered revealing everything that happened, but she felt like everything she'd been protecting would collapse.
I'm going to rest.
Swallowing her words, she went up the mansion's stairs.
Of course. You must be tired. Rest well. MHM.
Roken gestured his hand to go ahead.
Runan nodded and went to the second floor. Ha!
Once Runan entered her room, she sighed and settled on the ground. Biting her lip, she opened the ice cream box.
It was her favorite ice cream, but she didn't want to touch it.
She could only remember her older brother's face.
He came again. He is the same as before. Sirius Sullian hadn't always been like that.
After he came back from his second mission, where he was the only survivor, he'd changed.
It was as if he was a completely different person. And only towards her. For everyone else, he was still the kind and polite genius swordsman.
But to her, he'd become a monster of obsession of unknown origins.
Ruby.
The Ruby that he'd spoken about was a red-eyed squirrel that lived in a nearby tree when she was younger. Since they got along, she'd named her Ruby and used to play with her every day. But one day, Ruby scratched her hand. Ruby was stressed out during her pregnancy and had caused a very small injury. However, Syria, who'd seen it, caught every squirrel, including Ruby, in the area. Then he'd crushed them in front of her eyes. That was when he told her.
You are mine. You can't get hurt. Just keep breathing and live on.
If she told her father or mother about it, the house would be broken into pieces. He threatened that he would burn everyone except for her. After that day, Runan stopped speaking. Since someone else could fall victim, she didn't get close to anyone, humans and animals alike, and spoke as sparsely as she could. She'd been living alone like that, and one day she met a loner, a boy who looked even more lonely and full of suffering than herself.
Raon.
At first, she was just curious about how he could grow so quickly, and how he could endure with his bad constitution and stamina.
Simple curiosity.
She'd approached him because she was a little bit curious about his growth. That was how she was able to learn. She learned what kind of person Raon was. How much effort he'd been putting in, and the kind of hardships he went through. Looking at the boy that changed other people's gazes with effort, she thought she could also change herself, and actually started to change. Thanks to Raon and the trainees from the 5th training ground, she'd started to forget about her fear of Syria. But she had been reminded of that fear once again.
Runan kept staring at the ice cream inside the box until it completely melted. It's just me.
Lowering her head between her knees, she murmured in a wet voice.
Everything will be okay, as long as I endure it. It seemed like she couldn't eat the ice cream ever again. After Raon saw Runan off and went to the dormitory, wrath burst from the bracelet. Was he really human?
What? The one supposed to be the ice cream girl's older brother.
Ah.
He was a weirdo for sure.
Raon nodded.
Syria certainly had a friendly and soft atmosphere, but he also felt terrifying, like facing darkness. In particular, his eyes when he was threatening were devoid of life, like a dried-out leaf. It sent chills down the spine just from looking at them.
However, his acting was top-notch.
If he didn't see him crushing the squirrel and threatening Runan, he would have been tricked as well. He's a crazy bastard, just like Darius.
Syria didn't seem to feel human emotions.
Unlike Raon, who'd been taught that way, it looked like something was broken in him.
But since he said he is on a long-term mission, he won't be back for a while.
As long as he is the ice cream girl's older brother, problems will keep happening.
That's true. Even if Syria didn't return for several years, he would end up meeting Runan over and over in the future, as he was her family. No, maybe he is still keeping a watch on her. What was contained in his dry eyes was clearly an obsession. Give me your body. I'll kill him and return it to you. Ha! The King of Essence returns the favor twice and gets back at an enemy tenfold. Since the girl showed me a new world called the bead ice cream, I can do this much for her. You've got to be kidding me. Raon sneered and shook his hand. I'm serious. Even if you are serious, that can't happen. Why? He traumatized Runan. Even if you kill him, the trauma won't disappear. At worst, she might end up being even more suffocated. In this case, she has to stand up on her own, and... Raon tapped the ground with his finger. If it's about killing him, I can do it too. In his previous and current life combined, Runan was a stranger who was the most considerate towards him. Since he'd received a huge amount of help, he could kill Syria for her. You've really lost your senses. You won't be able to win against him even if there were 100 of you. He is already a master. Wrath frowned, telling him to stop his nonsense. He certainly is strong. If you know that, why are you sprouting nonsense? Because that's not the reason why a blade can't cut his throat. Raon tapped the sheath of his sword, emanating a chilly pressure. There is more than one way of killing somebody. Chapter 48. Even though House Sieghart mostly consisted of swordsmen, it also employed a magic tower because of various necessities. Although the magic tower's magicians were treated pretty well, since they couldn't become the main members of the family, they were often looked down upon by the swordsmen. Jake was a fifth circle magician of Magic Tower that felt bad about the situation. Salary, free time, and research funds were all top-notch, but the fact that they were looked down on by the swordsmen and that they weren't the key members of the family felt suffocating. While he had such thoughts, he was invited to the Central Martial Palace for the first time, where one of the most important members of the house, Karun Sieghart, resided. Jake swallowed hard and raised his head. He felt an intense pressure from Karun Sieghart, who was looking at him. His throat trembled. Why did he call me? Their status was as far apart as the earth from the heavens, and they weren't related in any way. He couldn't understand why he had called him. I heard that you will be supporting the 5th training ground for actual battle training next week. Ah, yes. That's true. Jake lowered his head with a trembling voice. He was supposed to support the 5th training ground's actual battle training, following Verbin's command as the Vice Master of the Magic Tower. I called on you because I have a request. A request. Karun was one of the influential figures of Sieghart. Granting his request would certainly help him immensely in the future. Please tell me. Stuttering a bit, Jake lowered his head. In this actual battle training, I heard an orc was going to be summoned against the children. That's right. About that orc, can it be strengthened? That was already requested by the 5th training ground's head instructor. He said a normal orc wasn't suitable for the drill because the trainees are too good. Ah, not just that, but I'm asking if it can be strengthened to a point where they stand no chance of winning. Should they have no chance of winning? Jake swallowed. Is he targeting one of the children? It looked like Karun was planning to either kill or hurt one of the children from the 5th training ground. It's possible. If you tell me which trainee is your target. Target? That's some strange thing to say. Karun's cold voice resounded throughout the extensive Central Martial Palace. Excuse me. I need to be careful since my magic sometimes goes awry. Which trainee should I be paying attention to in particular? Poof. It's Raon. Karun, who seemed satisfied with his wording, slowly nodded. Raon Sieghart. Jake's eyes shone. He knew that Raon had defeated Bayan, who was Karun's son. He could finally understand Karun's intentions. He is targeting Raon. After winning against the 3rd prince of the Owen Kingdom recently, he'd been praised as the very best among the trainees. There was no doubt that Karun's target was Raon. Despite it being a drill, it's pretty common to get injured during actual battle training. And there are rare occasions of that injury being permanent. That's true. I've seen that happen a few times as well. That's why I've prepared a decent monster.
When Karun snapped his fingers, the butler that was standing at his right side brought along an orc over 2 meters tall.
Jake swallowed hard. He could immediately tell since he was very experienced with dealing with orcs.
Even though the orc in front of him looked plain, he was at an extraordinary level.
It's an orc from the Dalan Mountains. Dalan Mountains.
The Dalan Mountains were a vicious area where many powerful monsters resided.
An orc living there would have been at a completely different level from a normal orc.
I'd like you to look after him by sending out this orc, so that no misfortune will happen to him. Karun rolled up the corners of his lips. He told him to look after him, but he meant to give him a permanent injury using the orc.
Ah.
And if, by any chance, the orc ends up causing trouble, take care of it immediately, so that it won't cause any problem afterwards.
If you properly complete this job, I'll recommend you as the Vice Master of the Magic Tower in the future. Thank you. You should leave.
Yes.
I'll obey no matter what.
Jake bowed until his nose almost touched the ground.
Saving the orc using the save monster magic, he left Karun's room. Did anyone see him come here?
Karun turned his head to the butler that had brought the orc. Since he took a detour to the inner part, there's no one that knows the magician came to this place.
He has quick wits.
Support him once he successfully handles this matter.
Shall I support him until he becomes the Vice Master of the Magic Tower? Of course not. Just enough that he will do anything to get more. Understood. The butler smiled. He bowed his head and left the room. Raon Zighart.
Karun murmured Raon's name in a low voice. He won against his son Ben, defeated Martha, and made the third prince kneel even though he was called Owen's future. As the master of Central Martial Palace and division leader of Striding Steads, it wasn't a big deal to him.
However, his activity was becoming an eyesore. More importantly, he was getting father's attention, albeit slightly.
He wasn't going to be an obstacle to Karun becoming the head of house, but getting rid of annoying things as fast as possible was the correct course of action. I should get rid of him before he grows up even more. That was the way he'd grown up, and the method he was taught in that cold place.
After finishing his night training in the training ground, Raon returned to the annex building.
He walked through the hallway silently because it was late at night, yet Sylvia's door burst open.
Raon!
The door collided against the wall. Sylvia dashed out, a red light radiating from her eyes.
Ugh! Did you just say ugh from seeing your mother?
Ugh?
No, that's... Did you promise to stroll through the garden with your mom or not? Ah. Raon's jaw dropped. I forgot.
Because of what happened the day before, he was so focused on training that he'd completely forgotten about it.
You forgot. You definitely forgot. That's not it. What are you saying? This is the first time in 3 days that I'm seeing you awake.
Sylvia walked towards him and raised her hand.
Mom? Raon stepped back, frowning. Why do you think I asked you to promise me a stroll?
Training is great, but resting is also important.
Because rest is part of training. Sylvia smiled softly and started patting Raon's head.
Since you are training at the training ground every day, please rest when you are here.
At least for half a day. Okay. Raon lowered his head.
I don't know what to do whenever I'm in front of her.
Sylvia, Helen, and the maids.
It wasn't that he disliked them.
If he actually disliked them, he would have run away already.
Since he was afraid of his affection growing even further towards those who'd been taking care of him since birth, he was forcing himself to keep a distance from them.
Are you hurt anywhere? You say that whenever I come back.
Of course.
I have to ask, since my son's goal is to become a swordsman. Even before hearing the answer, she started to check different parts of Raon's body.
Ignoring him even when he said he was okay, she only released him once she confirmed he was alright.
I told you I wasn't hurt. I'll be going, then. Not yet. Sylvia shook her head and hugged Raon tightly. I stink of sweat.
Since he'd returned after training without washing his body, he was in terrible condition.
But Sylvia didn't let him go. It doesn't stink at all, so don't worry.
It feels great to hug my son after such a long time. I can also tell how much you've grown. She let him go after hugging him for a long time. Her eyes shone happily, like a star. Did you eat already? Of course I did. It was before I came back. Good job with your training. You can go back and rest. Sylvia murmured that she would have a sweet dream, having hugged her son after a long time, and went back to her room. When Raon was about to return to his room while shaking his head, he met Helen's eyes as she stood at the end of the hallway. Young master, I'll fill up the bathtub. Please take a bath before resting. She smiled before disappearing sideways like a ghost. He could hear her laughing along as her footsteps got further away. Ha! Whenever he was home, he was unable to control his ability nor his emotions. However, since he didn't dislike it, it was just awkward. Feeling even more tired than when he trained, he went back to his room. Ah, I'm so tired. As he was resting for a bit in his chair, a knocking sound could be heard, and the door opened soon after that. Young master, the bathtub is ready. He thought it was Helen, but it was Judiel who stuck her head in. All right. I have something to tell you. As he was about to stand up after nodding, Judiel entered the room and closed the door. It's about the Central Martial Palace. Central Martial Palace? The Central Martial Palace was Karun Sieghart's castle, where Judiel was sent from. Continue. Raon sat back in his seat, his red eyes gleaming. Yes. Judiel knelt in front of Raon and lowered her head. They looked like a king and his retainer. I've received an order from the Central Martial Palace to grasp and report everything young Master Raon does once he returns to the Annex building. It must mean that they are plotting something. That seems to be the case. Is it about the real battle? Raon murmured the words that Rimmer told him that day. By real battle, you mean? Instructor Rimmer said there will be actual battle training next week. I think he will make his move there. Ah. Judiel suddenly lifted her head. Now that I think about it, trainees sometimes get to fight monsters during their actual battle training. I heard about that, too. He remembered Dorian screaming that they would probably fight monsters at the end of the training that day. Then he probably took measures on the monster, or on the magician who will be handling the monster, or... Raon closed his eyes and continued. It might be both. The next Monday, Jake went to the 5th training ground 1 hour earlier than the appointed time. I have to do well. In order to succeed in this damned place, connections were necessary. Until now, he'd never even gotten the worst possible connections. But what was offered to him this time wasn't just a decent connection, but one strong enough to lead him to the heavens. For the sake of his future, he needed to inflict a serious injury to Raon no matter what. That was the only way to gain Karun Sieghart's favor. I don't even need to worry about the aftermath. Raon Sieghart's background was almost non-existent, and Karun was a man that could become the next head of house. It was already decided who he needed to act for. Ha! Jake caught his breath and opened the door to the 5th training ground. He could see the trainees practicing their swordsmanship through the sandy dust. Since it wasn't the appointed time yet, he went to the outside border and watched the trainees. That boy is Bayan, and the one next to him must be Martha. Jake recognized the important trainees that he needed to not mess with, using the descriptions that he'd heard before. The one over there is Runan, the youngest of House Sullian, and... Finally, his gaze was directed at the golden-haired boy that was swinging his sword at the right side of the training ground. Is that boy Raon? He looks incredibly handsome. The way he was moving his feet and swinging his sword looked like a beautiful picture. I'm sorry, but I have no choice. I won't kill you at least. Jake bit his lip and sent a small amount of killing intent towards Raon. It was weak pressure that he was unconsciously emitting, too small for even a perceptive swordsman or a wild animal to sense. However, one person reacted to it. Raon, who had been focused on his sword, directed his gaze towards Jake. Eek! In a fright, Jake bumped his back against the wall and collapsed. He felt his heart tighten the moment he saw Raon's red eyes. Kook! As if he was standing naked in front of a savage beast, he couldn't move a single finger. Who was that guy?
Chapter 49. How can a brat's eyes be so? Jake's teeth chattered. He wanted to get up, but he couldn't move a single finger. When didn't know what to do, he heard frivolous footsteps. Did you come from the magic tower? Wow, you came so early. His head, which was frozen stiff, moved towards a voice as light as the footsteps. There was a red-haired elf smiling at him. Head Instructor Rimmer? Correct. Please come this way. I have things to tell you before training. Rimmer tapped his arm and pointed towards the head instructor's room. Okay. He answered and turned his head back to where Raon was. The boy was swinging his sword as if he wasn't interested. Ha! Jake took a deep breath and stood up. If Rimmer was any later in coming up to him, he would have pissed his pants. Are you feeling unwell? And no. Let's go. Yes. Following Rimmer, who nodded lightly, he entered the head instructor's room. Unlike his neat appearance, the room was so messy that there was nowhere to sit. Please sit down. But there's nowhere to sit. Ah, that's true. Rimmer smiled lightly and stood from his rocking chair. Well, it won't take a long time, so let's just do it like this. Are you already aware that you need to use strengthening magic on the orc that will be facing the trainees? Of course. Because of my excellent teachings, the trainees are stronger than they should be at their age. A normal orc won't be of any use for their training. Ah. His head went blank to his sudden boasting. I'll tell you how strong each of those children are, so please use the strengthening magic according to that. Is that possible? It's not a difficult thing to do since I'm specialized in summoning and handling monsters. I guess, since the Vice Master of Magic Tower, Verbin has also complimented you. Ah. When Rimmer talked about the Vice Master of Magic Tower, Jake's expression was strangely distorted. And one more thing, about the hallucination magic to make the monster look like a human. Ah, that can be solved with this. Jake lifted his right hand and showed him the ring on his middle finger. It's a hallucination artifact given to me by the Vice Master. Casting hallucination magic on the trainees is a simple matter using this ring. Oh, that's perfect. Rimmer whistled in satisfaction. Then please take care of it. Once everything ends well, I'll buy you and the Vice Master a drink. After saying that, he left the head instructor's room. My job's gotten easier. Since Rimmer entrusted him with everything about the monster, it wasn't going to be difficult to summon that orc to inflict a deadly injury to Raon. He could run away afterward while making excuses. That guy. Jake recalled Raon, the boy he saw a moment ago. He was reluctant about injuring a boy he didn't even know at first, but he wasn't anymore. The damn brat that humiliated him had to be wounded even more seriously. Clench. Jake clenched his jaw and left the instructor's room. Raon calmly watched the middle-aged magician head to the instructor's room behind Rimmer. Even though it was only for a split second, he could feel killing intent from that magician. Rather than killing, he wanted to harm him. It was something that anyone other than him wouldn't have been able to perceive. You are so hated at such a young age. What have you been doing with your life? Back in Devildom, every single devil worshipped the King of Essence. Shut up. Raon used his feet to push Wrath, who was laughing at him, away. He must be the one. Karun's dirty trick that Judiel mentioned seemed to be that magician. To be unable to hide his own pressure. He is worse than a kitten. At least a kitten is cute. A guy like him is completely useless. Raon swept his hair back, looking at the instructor's room. He will strengthen the monster. Following Karun's order, the magician was certainly going to enhance the monster that was going to fight him to an abnormal degree. He will try to either kill me or inflict a serious injury. He could only laugh at how pathetic the plan was. His son was too good for him. Pathetic. When he turned around while clicking his tongue, he met Runan's eyes as she entered the training ground. Her eyes, which he hadn't seen for the past 2 days, were the same as always. His chest tightened for some reason. Dad told me today's training was about fighting monsters. She started talking about the day's training, as if she didn't want to think about what happened back then. Is it? Runan visibly nodded. She was obviously forcing herself to act like nothing happened, but he couldn't tell her anything since she seemed to want to forget about that matter. She went to the break room after telling him she was going to prepare for the training. Aren't you going to ask her about it? I don't know what to say. And it's her family's problem. He wasn't sure how he could give advice about her family when he didn't even know anything about his own emotions. However, he at least knew what Syria did to Runan. He could solve that problem with the correct opportunity. Why, young master? Did you know about it? As he was bitterly licking his lips, Dorian approached him while restlessly rubbing his stomach. About what? Today's actual battle training, it's not just about fighting a monster. Then what? Apparently, we have to kill a monster. We have to shed blood for real. What do we do? Biting his fingernail, he rolled his eyes. Bloodshed, huh? Yes. Ending their life is the training's objective. It's really crazy. That's great. Eek. Leaving behind Dorian, who was screaming, he looked at the break room that had Runan entered. Let's try breaking the curse. Everyone, attention. Rimmer, who went to the instructor's room, was already standing on the platform. He clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. Do you remember that I told you to brace yourselves, since there would be actual battle training today? Yes. The trainees answered as they gathered in the center of the training ground. Their expressions were full of anticipation. It looks like you are starting to trust me. Your eyes are glittering. The trainees giggled at Rimmer's joke. It seemed they started to understand Rimmer's true intentions after spending so much time with him. Although you already know most of it with the hints and information spread by some instructors, I shall still explain. Today's training is an actual battle against monsters. His voice, which had been completely mischievous until a moment ago, grew calm. The entire training ground's atmosphere became heavy. There's no mercy in a monster's axe. Unlike a match between you, or with night trainees, they will never stop. Don't be careless or nervous. Keep your usual composure when you face them. Yes. Trainees clenched their fists and shouted their heads off. This is the Magic Tower's magician Jake, who will be helping us with training today. Give your greetings. I look forward to your kind cooperation. I am also looking forward to your cooperation. Jake bowed in response and quickly sought out Raon with his eyes. It's fine now. The strange gaze that squeezed his heart earlier wasn't there anymore. They were normal eyes that he wouldn't have noticed if he met him in the street. However, there was no way the pressure earlier was a mistake. Considering he was Karun's target, there was something special with that boy. Then Sir Magician, please take care of it. Yes. Jake nodded to Rimmer, who was waving his hand, and went to the front of the platform. Summon monster. When Jake hit the ground with his staff after the incantation, a magic circle was drawn on the training grounds floor. A green light burst out of the blue letters forming in a circle. Whoosh! The light disappeared slowly and an enormous humanoid shape appeared. Over 2 meters tall with robust muscles, protruding front teeth, and green skin, it was an orc, the most common yet most dangerous monster. Grr! Eek! Ugh! The orc ground his teeth while lifting his axe. The trainee swallowed, facing the wild bloodthirst and stench. Since it's still under my control, you don't need to worry. Once Jake spun his finger, the orc turned in the same direction. The monster you will be fighting today is this orc. I knew it was an orc. Is it finally time for a real battle? Ha! The trainees looked up at Jake, expressions mixed between nervousness and excitement. Just as the instructor said, you shouldn't be careless because it's an orc. Since I can't stop it sometimes, you should always maintain your focus. And? Jake pointed at the orc with the ring on his right hand. Whir! The magic circle surrounding the orc was twisted like a vine and shone with 5 colors, then the orc's appearance started to change. The protruding front teeth went back into place and the green skin burned with white. It only took a few seconds until the orc became a plain, middle-aged man with brown hair holding an axe. A human? What's this? Why is there a human? You won't be fighting a normal orc, but an orc that has been transformed into a human through magic. Jake moved the orc's axe and pointed it at the trainees. Eek. Ugh. That's just a human. The trainees were surprised at the sudden change and stared blankly at the orc that had become a human. I'll tell you one more thing. Rimmer walked up in front of Jake and raised his finger. The fight today isn't about winning against the orc or neutralizing it. It will only end once you cut off its head. With his raised finger, he pointed at the human-appearing orc. Ah. That's. The panicked trainees could only look at each other without being able to step up. Most of the orcs that were caught by magicians have already killed a human before. Since there's no need for mercy, do your best to fight and win. Rimmer said in an unusually heavy voice, then stepped back. Dorian's information was accurate. Raon nodded. It's not bad training. Most swordsmen were unable to make the finishing blow in their first real battle. In fact, many unfortunate geniuses had died like that, unable to overcome their first actual fight despite having excellent abilities. In order to prevent that from happening, today's fight wasn't only about fighting a monster, but also about preparing them to fight humans in the future. And Raon looked at Runan, who was sticking next to him. Her lips were trembling after hearing that she had to cut its head off. It's a perfect opportunity to break her curse. Rimmer was probably unaware of it, but it seemed he could undo serious brainwashing on Runan thanks to this training. Are you not even paying attention to that scum magician? Of course. Raon nodded. The best thing he could do was strengthen some slightly ferocious orc that he got somewhere to try fighting him. It wasn't even worth being nervous about. Removing the engraved fear from Runan's mind was more important right now. Then let's start right away. The first person to fight will be... I'll do it. Bayan raised his hand before Jake even finished speaking. You must know him, right? He is the son of Central Martial Palace's master. Please strengthen the orc a lot for him. All right. Jake licked his lips upon hearing Rimmer's explanation. Of course he knew about him, since he was the son of the person who gave him the task. Loop agility, loop strength. Once he uttered the incantation to increase the agility and strength, blue light fluttered around the orc and his yellow eyes became even more violent. Go. Once Jake extended his finger forward, the orc stepped up with heavy footsteps. After clenching and opening his fist a few times, Bayan unsheathed the real sword he had been supplied with. He nodded at Jake, signaling that he was ready. Then let's begin. Once Jake flicked his finger, the letters surrounding the orc disappeared. Grr! The orc kicked the off from the ground with a thunderous roar. Running like a beast, it slammed its axe down at Bayan's head. I can see everything. Bayan lifted his sword as he used his aura. Clash! As a rusty axe and well-polished sword collided against each other, red sparks appeared. Kook! Bayan raised his eyes sharply. The hand that was holding the sword trembled, as if it were creaking. What is this weight? He'd never seen nor fought against an orc, but he thought he could easily cut through him with how strong he currently was. However, the weight of the orc's axe wasn't something he could handle easily. It wasn't lacking in any way when compared to the knight trainee of the Owen Kingdom he'd fought last time. Ha! Powerfully turning his wrist, he deflected the orc's axe. Gore! The orc stepped back a couple times, then dashed back at him even faster. Its eyes glowed yellow, full of intent. It wanted to tear Bayan limb from limb. The trainees that were watching were surprised by the bloodlust, but Bayan wasn't intimidated. How dare you! Instead, he furiously slashed with his sword. Wham! Wham! When the orc pummeled down his axe as if it was facing the enemy of its life, Bayan's sword pierced into its opening. Stab! Red blood spurted from the orc's shoulder and thigh. Qua! However, it kept coming at him with an even fiercer roar. It looked like a complete beast now. I'll end you. Getting under the orc, Bayan slashed upwards. Clank! The moment he was about to cut the orc's head off after pushing back its axe, Bayan's sword was turned to the right. Instead of its neck, it cut through more than half of the orc's forearm. Bayan bit his lip, unable to finish it off despite having the opportunity. Kua!
Orc kept forcing its way into him like a bull, despite being seriously injured in its shoulder and forearm. It had become weaker, but its vigor remained the same. Whoosh! Bayan used his footwork to get to the orc's back as it slowed down. The moment he was about to cut off the orc's head by slashing horizontally, his sword stopped once again. Damn it! Bayan stepped back while cursing. The tip of his sword was trembling, as if he was terrified. Bayan! Rimmer, who was watching the fight from the platform, raised himself. Even though you know that what's trying to kill you is a monster, and not a human, you still can't kill it, right? His voice was peaceful, as if he already knew it would happen. It's because you are good-natured. Since you see that monster as a human, you can't move your sword properly. However, Rimmer continued, pointing at the orc grinding its teeth. Like I said before, that orc has already tasted human blood before. Most of the monsters that magicians possess have already killed humans before. He's right. Jake nodded, confirming what Rimmer said. It's okay to be unable to kill it now, as this is just a practice. However, if your hand stops on the battlefield, the swordsman or monster that you were unable to kill will end up killing your ally instead. Ugh. While deflecting the orc's axe, Bayan listened to Rimmer's calm advice. And you can't stop now if you want to catch up to your target, can you? Hearing that, Bayan turned his head towards Raon. After meeting his red eyes, his sword was clad in a heavier aura than before. Growling. How dare you? The moment the orc's axe dropped vertically, Bayan stretched his knees and pierced into its space. Ha! With a shout of concentration, his sword drew a semicircle. Slash! As a red line was drawn into the sky, the orc's head fell and its body collapsed. As its life ended, its human appearance returned to its original orcish form. Huff! Huff! Bayan gasped for breath, sticking his sword on the ground. However, he didn't look away. He kept watching the corpse he'd created. Good job. Rimmer smiled and Bayan looked at him for a moment, then turned his head. It was the first time that their eyes met without frowning. Bayan took a glance at Raon for the last time, then returned to his place. Snap! When Jake snapped his fingers, the orc's corpse disappeared. However, the blood covering the training grounds floor still remained. Well then, next is me. Martha stood up, confidently raising her hand. There was no hesitation in her footsteps as she walked up to the orc. Raon looked away from Martha's confident back and looked at Runan. Ugh. Contrary to Martha, Runan's lips were trembling as she looked at the blood-soaked floor. Her face looked as white as a sheet. Rayon's eyes grew gloomy. Runan had been avoiding shedding blood as much as she could. When she sparred against other trainees, or the night trainee, she'd only suppress them without actually injuring them. He didn't really think anything of it back then, but now that he looked back at it, it seemed she'd decided to fight like that because she was afraid of blood. So, it was the blood. Sirius Sullian carved fear into her while showing her blood. Crushing the squirrel must have been to remind her of that trauma. Frightening coldness covered Rayon's red eyes. Sirius Sullian. I'll break the curse you've cast on Runan. Chapter 50. Please make it stronger for that arrogant girl. Rimmer pointed at Martha, who confidently stepped forward. All right. Jake nodded and summoned an orc. It was bigger and looked even more violent than the one that fought Bayan. Loop strength, loop agility. Using a bit more mana than with Bayan, Jake increased the orc's strength and agility, then released its control. Qua! The orc roared and pounced on her like a bull. A mere monster. Martha clenched her teeth and kicked off from the ground. She struck with her sword, aiming at the orc coming at her. Coo! The orc also swung its greatsword at a comparable speed. Slam! Slum! Along with the thunderous noise of a boulder being split apart, the swords crashed countless times. Qua! Fully utilizing Titan's aura, Martha twisted. Gore! Deflecting the orc's greatsword with the steel on her shoulder, she sliced with her sword. Hack! A definite strike. Martha's sword seized the opening and cut off the orc's head in one fell swoop. Ha! After glaring at the orc's corpse collapsed on the ground, Martha straightened her back and breathed out.
Did it really take you the whole day to kill something like that? Don't tell anyone you are from the same place as me. You're too low. Ugh.
Bian shut his mouth as he listened to the words Martha let fall as she went back. He couldn't say anything after seeing the way she broke through the orc with her strength and ended its life in an instant.
Martha. Raon called out to Martha as she walked to the back. Go get your shoulder treated after training. There might be after effects.
Martha pouted and turned her head. He did give his share of advice as the top trainee, so the rest was up to her.
Raon also turned his head. Snap.
The orc's corpse disappeared at Jake's gesture, but the red pool of blood was seeping into the ground and the stench spread throughout the training ground.
Ugh. Runan's trembling was getting worse and worse.
Her pink lips were turning completely pale.
Why aren't you doing anything if you are going to break her curse? Because it's not the right time.
In order to heal a deep scar, it was necessary to let it fester until it rotted. Only then could the scar be completely removed.
Raon tapped his finger, watching Jake summon the third orc. It wasn't the right time to pop the bloated blister yet. The fight to death between trainees and monsters continued. Thanks to Bian and Martha's great opening, the trainees didn't run away despite being nervous.
It took a while for some of them, but they all managed to finish off their orc after aiming for its head, heart, or through a desperate fight. Raon watched the arena as the sun began to set.
Dorian was using his footwork while screaming. Qua!
The orc followed him with a horrible roar, but it couldn't catch Dorian because his feet were simply too fast.
Ha!
Shouting that he was scared, Dorian swung his sword.
The orc's back was cut instead of its neck. Eek! Wah! Dorian was even more surprised than the injured orc and started running away.
The orc was infuriated and pounced at him with a dreadful shriek.
What is that? When is it ending? It's already been 30 minutes. 30 minutes. His stamina and speed are great, at least. There's only Raon and Runan left.
They will finish even faster.
The trainees sighed and watched the chase between Dorian and the orc. Raon licked his lips while watching Dorian's feet. If only he had a bit more guts.
Dorian was nimble on his feet and his sword technique was sharp, but he was too cowardly. If only he could fix his scaredy cat nature, he could be ranked right after Martha, Runan, and Bian.
Russell.
He turned around at the sand's crumbling sound. Runan was grasping the sand tightly, to the point that her fingernails were bleeding.
Ugh.
Her face was completely pale, her lips were covered in bruises after being bitten countless times, and her hands and feet were trembling as if there was an earthquake. It was a typical appearance of a person who wasn't simply scared, but completely terrified. Rimmer, who was on the platform, furrowed his brows and looked at Runan. He must have been wondering whether he should send her back.
That won't do.
After all, it was the best moment to pop the blister that had completely matured.
Raon stood up and went next to Runan, making her shivering ease slightly.
You must be scared.
Runan didn't turn around or respond. Blood is scary for everyone.
A trainee who's using the sword for the first time, and an experienced swordsman who has gone through hundreds of battlefields, must feel the same way about that. Runan's chin turned slightly.
Same goes for me.
Dorian, who is fighting right now, and those who fought before are all scared.
Really? Runan spoke with a dried-out voice. Yes. However, do you know what's even more scary than that?
She slowly shook her head.
Being too terrified to do anything.
Raon's eyes glowed viciously. The nature of assassin Raon, rather than Raon Zighart, was leaking from him. If I just stand still because I'm too scared or afraid, nothing will change.
Nothing will be solved like that. He was actually afraid.
He was afraid that his desire for revenge against Darius Robert would subside because he was satisfied with his current life. He was also afraid that his revenge, his actions, would bring undesirable consequences on Sylvia and the maids in the annex building. He was scared and afraid, but he didn't intend to give up on any of them. He was going to take his revenge against Darius no matter what, and find a way for Sylvia and maids to live on happily.
Resolving himself once again, Raon turned around to Runan. You must also have something like that.
Raon chewed his thumb to create a wound.
Tap.
As the red blood gathered on his thumb fell on the ground, Runan stepped back and her teeth chattered.
Ah. Don't run away. You won't be able to overcome it if you don't do it now. Raon. Raon.
Blood is scary.
However.
Raon approached Runan and grabbed her hand. She had stepped back to the point that she was almost lying down. The blood flowing out of his finger colored her white hand in red.
It's also nothing special. The blood won't harm you in any way.
Ha! Runan's eyes widened, seeing the drops of blood flowing down from her hand. She looked flustered, realizing that the blood wasn't hurtful, saddening, or heavy. I don't know exactly what your older brother did to you. However, the more you are afraid, the more his shadow will be cast over you.
Ah!
The trembling on Runan's hand started to visibly subside. If you keep running away because you are scared, you will have no choice but to be dragged around for your entire life.
Runan Sullian, you are the one who can protect yourself and your family.
That was Raon's heartfelt advice. Runan looked like the Raon from his previous life, when he was dragged around by Darius Robert.
Arg! I thought I was going to die.
Dorian, who returned after barely managing to cut the orc's head off, sank to his knees.
It was really difficult. I almost died. Sniff.
He murmured while wiping his tears away with his sleeve.
Do you have a squirrel? Raon looked at Dorian while standing up. A squirrel? Even I don't have everything. Wait, I have one.
Murmuring why do I have this, Dorian took out the wooden squirrel sculpture from his belly pocket. It was a cute squirrel with impressive red eyes.
Take this. He gave the squirrel that Dorian gave him to Runan.
She accepted the squirrel with trembling hands. That's it for my advice. I'll tell you the rest with my sword.
After saying that, Raon walked towards the arena. It's so unusual for you to step up.
Wrath sneered, murmuring that he didn't even know his place.
You can think like that. Raon nodded.
It was just like Wrath said. It was unusual for him to step up like that. It was because she was the first stranger in his life that was considerate towards him, but that wasn't the only reason. She reminded him of his previous life. Because she looked similar to himself in his previous life, or he'd been brainwashed by Darius Robert, he unconsciously spoke and acted.
This is the last time.
He already finished explaining with words, and he was about to show her with his sword. If she couldn't free herself from the brainwashing of that blood despite all that, then that was her limit.
You idiot.
Worry about yourself first.
It's pretty obvious you will struggle just like the other worms.
Listening to Wrath, he had a great idea.
Then shall we make a bet?
Bet?
Yes, and it will be very advantageous for you.
What is it?
If I can't cut down the orc in a single strike, I'll take your wrath.
A single strike.
A single strike? Are you serious?
Of course. After giving some advice you read in a book, you are now looking down on killing.
Wrath giggled and vibrated the bracelet.
All right, it's a single strike.
2 strikes and it will be your loss.
The message appeared as he stopped laughing.
Wrath proposes the third bet.
Condition, cut off the strengthened orc's neck in a single strike.
Upon success, all stats +2, a random trait.
Upon failure, creation of 10 points of wrath.
I accept.
He expected Wrath to take this bet, since he didn't know he was an assassin in his previous life.
The doormat is here once again. Secretly smiling about Wrath, Raon went to the arena.
Oh, you aren't the last person this time. Rimmer whistled. His eyes were wavering like he was having fun. He must have heard everything he told Runan. He is the strongest one here. Please take out the strongest orc you have.
All right.
Jake firmly shut his mouth. Nodding with a determined expression, he chanted the spell. Whir!
Along with an outbreak of a blue magic circle on the floor, a new orc appeared.
Its shape was similar to the other orcs, but its muscles were more distinct, with its body was full of scars.
Gore!
Although it was unable to move its body due to the magic circle, it was still expressing its ferocious instinct. Whir! Green, red, and blue magic circles covered the orc's upper body, and its pressure increased exponentially. ZZZT. When Jake extended his hand, the orc's appearance changed into a rough man. Be ready for the match. Raon nodded. He was about to warm up his right wrist after lightly spinning his left wrist. Clank! Jake's magic circle broke like glass, and the orc broke out. Grrrrrrr. Rushing while screeching, it struck down with its blood-stained axe. Its power and speed were on a completely different level from the other orcs. What? Stop it. Damn. Everyone panicked, but Raon's eyes were even calmer. It's because I knew about it all along. He'd expected this would happen the moment he saw Jake's excited eyes. Rustle. Raon unsheathed his sword from his waist. One flower blossomed on top of the blade. The golden flower shimmered like a haze upon receiving the evening glow. The 10,000 flames cultivation, first flame. Flame spirit. The flower petals fluttered and cut through the ground. Under the evening glow, another evening glow was drawn, and the orc's movement stopped. Gore. Without being able to swing his lifted axe, its head fell to the ground. Thud, thud. Red blood gushed out under the overlapping evening glows, and the orc's heavy body collapsed. Cruelly beautiful, it was a spectacle that would make the best painter in the continent snap their brush. The instructors that were running towards them to stop the orc, the trainees that stood up in surprise, and even Jake, who was controlling the orc, were at a loss for words. Using the expertise from his previous life, he suppressed Jake. Facing an assassin's pressure, one whose life was all about killing people, Jake grabbed his neck and sank to his knees. Gore. His eyes turned inside out. He wanted to continue, but Runan's turn was after his. After threatening him moderately, he removed his pressure. Wish. Shaking off the blood from his sword, he turned around. Kook. Damn. Bayan ground his teeth so hard that the sound could be heard, and Martha twisted her lips with furrowed brows. They both looked extremely frustrated. You. Wow. The trainees' mouths were so wide open that bugs could go inside. They were trembling violently, as if they were hit by a sea wave. Sea crazy. What technique was that? A single strike. The instructors were standing dumbfounded. After taking a glance at everyone, he looked at Runan, who was at the very back. Her eyes were no longer soaked in darkness. He nodded to her. It's your turn now. Watching Raon, who went into the arena, Runan hugged the squirrel sculpture. Does he know everything? She purposefully avoided talking about it to avoid harming Raon. She relaxed her eyes, pretending it was nothing. It turned out all right. She thought that was the end of the matter. However, he talked to her like he knew everything. Raon's calm voice felt like it slowly untied the hand that was squeezing her heart. When he extended his bleeding hand, she was scared. She wanted to run away immediately. However, when she grabbed that hand, even though her hand was soaked in that blood, she wasn't scared or afraid. It simply felt warm, like a small fire. That was when she finally realized. The blood itself wasn't scary. It felt like the black shadow tying up her heart had become more sparse. Runan looked at Raon, who stood in the arena with a calm breath. His back was small, but for some reason it looked wider than anyone else. Whir. While she was nervously watching that back, the orc's magic circle suddenly disappeared. Qua. The orc pounced at Raon with a fierce roar. And no. The moment she stood up with a trembling chin, Raon unsheathed his sword. A golden flower blossomed on top of the silver blade. A beautifully radiating flower drew a line, following the evening glow. The moment the two evening glows overlapped with each other, blood gushed from the orc's neck like a fountain. Beautiful. The blood she'd been scared and afraid of since childhood, the drops of blood that shouldn't have ever looked like that, beautifully embroidered the space. Raon shook off his sword and turned around. His eyes spoke to her. It's your turn now. MHM. Runan stood up. Her hands were no longer trembling.